Oh, just so you know, some comments. So it's one, it's a whole year, it's the full amount, sure. I'm gonna ask that question.
Good evening. I'd like to call a special meeting of Government Operations Committee for Monday, November 8th, 2021. Roll call, please.
Fama?
Here.
Payleitner?
Here.
Songard?
Here.
Bancroft?
Here.
Lencioni?
Yes.
Petrella?
Here.
Wirball?
Here.
Lesser?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Okay, thank you. So, Finance Department, recommendation to approve a preliminary estimate of 2021 property tax levy in the amount of $24,576,475. So this is a continuation from last Monday's meeting. So, good evening, Heather, and the floor is yours.
Good evening. Thank you very much. As you stated, this is a follow-up to last week's meeting regarding the property tax levy and increasing that levy amount to the 4.99%. That is the truth in taxation limit. As requested by some of the council members, I wanted to provide some additional information to drill down a little bit on some of the financial impacts and rationale for our recommendation to increase that property tax levy to the 4.99%. I realize there's a little difficulty in trying to look at this separate from budget time, but unfortunately the way that the timing works on both, we have to deal with one separately from the other. But a lot of my recommendation is coming based on last year's budget and some of the deficits that we ran into and shortfalls that we had in cutting some of the expenditures that were necessary, as well as some of our transfers out. You do have some detailed information in the packet. I will ask all of the department heads to just give a 2 to 3 minute high-level overview of that information contained within, but we are all available for any additional questions you may have. But I wanted to sort of do a 10-year look back at some of the items that have been pushed off continually in the budget, as well as give you some of the financial impacts regarding debt service and some of the shortfalls that we anticipate facing in the coming years. One of the reasons that this is important to tackle, just looking at the broad financial picture, is because we were looking at a stable revenue source. As a lot of the rating agencies recommend, property taxes are relatively consistent year to year, and they're not subject to the same market fluctuations as sales tax and other taxes like alcohol tax may be. So this allows us to diversify our revenue sources and ensure we have that continued sustainable source of revenue if there is an impact to one, as we have seen in the last couple of years with the COVID pandemic. If you look back over our budget numbers for the last handful of years, you will see that our budget numbers are rising on an annual amount by approximately $2 to $3 million a year. A lot of this is based on increases in obligations from salaries that are obligated in our union contract, as well as our pension obligations have increased significantly, almost doubled in the last few years. That being coupled with the idea that a lot of our revenues have stayed flat, minus some of the impacts that we've had from additional CARES Act funding, necessitates an increase for an additional revenue stream, and this is a logical way to produce that, to ask the residents to contribute to some of those operational costs that do benefit the city as a whole. Additionally, we will be increasing our debt service payments per capita. That's gone up from $3,500 per resident to approximately $4,600 per resident. So this will allow us a way to tackle some of the projects we need without consistently bonding out for that debt and paying interest on top of the project cost itself. So with that, I will turn it over to each of the department heads. We will go through the information in the same order that was contained within your packet. Again, I want a high-level overview, but if there are any questions from any of you at any point, please stop, and we will be happy to answer those. So with that, I will turn it over to Pete for the director for the Public Works comments.
Good evening. Heather and I had a little laugh about this earlier today, but I don't think I've ever been asked to explain the Public Works budget in 2 to 3 minutes, but I'm going to try. I'll be following the packet information directly and certainly focused on this current fiscal year's budget for Public Works. But I will say that this budget is really representative of how the Public Works budget has been kind of established and weeded through since I've been involved with it over 10 years ago. So it is really a familiar budget and a budget process that we've been through. So I'm going to start with Category 1, which is entitled in your packet, the Fiscal Year 21-22 Public Works Capital Project, Deferred to Balance the Budget. This is a general fund cash set of projects that really came up late in the game last year, and this was a way to try to balance the budget before we got to discussions with the city council. The idea was that staff was going to provide a balanced budget. So the Public Works Department, like most other departments, in particular Public Works, was challenged with reducing our budget that we presented at the staff level by $1.5 million. And we did that. And so I'm not going to go through every project that was deleted out of our budget. I'll just highlight a few. The LED streetlight retrofit project was one that we established several years ago. It's been a project that allows us to replace old light fixtures, street light fixtures with LED fixtures, which are more efficient. And that's got a 10-year return on investment after we replace those light fixtures. So it's a good ongoing project that we just put on delay for a while. The State Street Creek storm improvements design was put on hold. That was about a $120,000 project. For the last probably decade, we've focused on the east side 7th Avenue Creek project. We've got a really nice project that is underway right now on the 7th Avenue Creek. The next focus, or main focus, is to move to the State Street Creek, which is on the west side. Very similar process, a decade-long process of improvements there that we were going to begin the design on that this year, but that was held off. 7th Avenue Creek, going back to that, we have almost completed phase 1 of the 7th Avenue Creek project, but there are 2 other phases that some of the older men who have been here for a while know that are in order after the first phase. And this was a hold on the second design phase for that project. We also have a street rating evaluation process. That's a $75,000 number that allows us to get a street rating by a consultant that comes in once every 5 years. Well, we're on year number 7 to get that information, and that's data that our engineers use to help rate our street program. And, of course, you all know about the citywide bike and ped plan that was also put on hold, and I think we had that in our budget for at least 3 to 5 years and kept getting pushed. So the second category is the Public Works capital projects deferred at the staff budget discussions. These are large, general funded, bonded projects, and every year Public Works comes in with a handful of these. There's various reasons to delay them, but mainly related to just the amount of bonded projects that we have. So some examples of that, the Indiana pedestrian bridge replacement, that's a $2.9 million replacement project. We have an engineer go out and evaluate that pedestrian bridge each year, and it's just a matter of time before we get a bad report card on that, and we'll have to shut that pedestrian bridge down. But the decision was to hold off on the replacement of that. Redgate Bridge guardrail painting, some of you have talked to me about as you go over the Redgate Bridge. We need to repaint those. A lot of them are rusted out. They're safe. We acknowledge that, but they're in pretty bad shape and need to be replaced. That's a $700,000 number. And Peck and Campton Hills permanent traffic signal. We have had currently a temporary light at that intersection since 2002. So this is one that keeps repeating, that just gets deferred from year after year. So the next category is general fund operational budget. What I like to call this one is kind of our bread and butter operational budget for the public services group. This includes snow and ice removal chemicals. Typically, we can store 7,000 tons of salt in our salt domes. We go in generally with a budget to fill those each year. We don't want to be in a situation where we don't have enough salt to finish the snow season. This year, that budget was cut to only include 5,000 tons of salt ordered. Typically, we don't get in trouble with this. We did have a close call in 2015 where we were actually out of budget and we had to pay a premium on getting salt at the very end of the salt season. So it's just one of those things that from a public services perspective, we like to have salt available so that we know we're not going to run out. Snow and ice removal services was cut by about $58,000. That's a $225,000 budget. That affected our cul-de-sac contractors. So maybe not Johnny on the spot with cul-de-sacs as we would like to be. It's a service-related item. Landscaping has been increasing in the downtown area. The Sterling Bank and area of First Street has opened up in the last year and a half. That increases our landscape plantings. With the closure of First Street, that added some landscaping as well. And we're just trying to match the increase of landscaping in the downtown to cover those costs. That was not approved. Street repairs. We typically go in with road patching, maintenance, things that several of you call me on a lot of times during the year about street projects. There's a bigger picture here that I did not have, unfortunately didn't get it into the packet, but I'd be glad to update it for you. But I do want to share that our annual street program in total is a $2.8 million budgeted project. That gives us a resurfacing for our streets on a 55-year basis. And some of you recall in 2018, I call it the Karen Young presentation, who presented the information. We try to strive for a 25 to 30-year cycle. And if the street program was funded at that cycle, that would include a $1.9 million additional funds to be provided to our street program. And the last thing I provided in your packet that I don't want to spend a lot of time on, but it's representative of the sewer and water utilities. There are some projects there that those two utilities are supposed to be funded on itself, but they indirectly affect the general fund. And that's why we wanted to point those out. We have $100 million of total capital projects in just the water and sewer fund that were approved in the 2020 budget that will last through 2025. But those, with that, there are some utility rate increases that have happened, and I think we represented that those rates maybe not are enough to cover those costs at this point in time. And it also creates, all of those are bonded type projects and also EPA loan type projects that affect the overall bond power of the city, which affects the general fund. So with that, I think we're going to go through the presentations, and then I'll certainly be here available for questions.
I think I can make the 1 to 2 minute mark in HR. So you've read the information that I included in your packet, but one of the things I just really want to reiterate that while my examples that I provided all of you of suspended or deferred expenses or unfunded initiatives, you know, they're not mission critical like you're going to hear from Public Works or Police and Fire. But what I wanted to articulate is they are what's needed if we want to have St. Charles be and continue to be a destination employer and an organization that leverages, you know, and attracts top quality talent to provide those top tier services to our residents. So I thought I'd just go over a few things that I think will be important for the city as an employer to compete in the talent market, to retain and grow our employees, and to respond to some of the costly compliance mandates that are coming our way and continue to come our way, and that, of course, all the departments have things like that. First, refining and marketing our employer brand in order to attract top talent, I think, is important and something that I would need some outside expert help to help develop that type of employer brand out there. We have a really tight labor market right now. I'm sure you're all experiencing it in your own businesses. And candidates are not looking just for good compensation or benefits, but they want to know, does this employer fit with my values and my beliefs? And so we need to be able to articulate what is our brand, what are we offering them. I think this is particularly important in certain lines here that we are really having trouble recruiting. Police, of course, firefighter, paramedic, building and code employees, water and wastewater, very challenging, and linemen. Secondly, compensation and benefits. That's always going to be the main driver on when a person decides what job that they're going to take. And we have competitive wages. The council has supported that. And I think our benefits package is comparable to other communities. And one of the things that I have explored previously is offering some benefits related to kind of the modern day demands of caregiving for people, whether it's for children or elder care, and brought some things forward related to that. I think that type of benefit would be a competitive edge for the city. And then thirdly, just going over and monitoring what are some of the legal and legislative changes that occur that provide direct cost impacts to us. We know that the current administration is talking about paid parental leave. And then in the state level, we have some initiatives related to unions, increased unions or union authority, and all those things. They have some direct costs, and then they have some indirect costs. And I like to highlight that just because that's something that we're talking about in terms of keeping pace with costs that are thrust upon us that we can't really control. A good example of that is workers' comp. You know, our premium increases with workers' comp, the main driver of that is wages. Wages go up, so your workers' comp costs go up. So I hope this gives you just a little bit of idea of what HR's challenges are and how that impacts what we're seeking today. Thanks.
Good evening. I just had some of the larger items from the fire side, and they kind of mirror Public Works. Talked about the capital projects and how they've been deferred. When Station 1 was built, 2009, it was downsized by 25%. It was supposed to have 4 bays instead of 3. And at the time, the space was going to be made up at Station 4, which is at least the site of which is at Redgate Road and Route 31. That's been deferred. We all remember the Great Recession right after 2009. So that was understandable, but that's been more than a decade. And the fallback plan was to do an expansion on the back of our East Side Station, Fire Station 2, to make up that space. And again, because of funding, it's been one of those projects that annually gets deferred. This has led to apparatus either having to sit outside in the back of our fire stations, outside exposed to the weather, not ready to respond because reserve apparatus obviously can't have water in the winter and stuff, so it's basically downgraded and sitting out there, putting up with the damage of the weather. Or it's had to be at the Public Works garage over on South Avenue, which means we have to respond if something breaks down. We have to respond all the way over there to get a vehicle to put that company back in service. So there's a delay that our companies are out of service for a while if something happens. Or our trailers, we've downgraded to trailers for special operations like hazmat, technical rescue, water rescue if we have a problem in the river. We have to go over there to get the trailers, which is a great response, especially when you have people, you know, that might be in peril in the river. Other capital projects that have kind of been deferred annually. Our fire stations on the east and west side are over 30 years old. One was opened in '86, one was opened in '89. We've tried to keep them up, but basically all that gets done is if a roof leaks, it gets fixed. If a faucet breaks, it gets replaced. We'd like to do some upgrades. Nobody really lives in their house for 30 or 35 years without upgrading the kitchen, upgrading the carpet, upgrading the tiles, stuff like that. We're basically living in the same building that was built 30, 35 years ago. So, operationally, one of our big issues is our training tower. It was opened in 1981. It's now 40 years old. We know at 30 years it was going to be outdated. We understood with the Great Recession, but it's been in the budget the last 5 to 7 years, and it's a substantial cost to replace a building like that. But it's one of the things that continually gets pushed back. We just had to have an engineering firm come out. We're waiting for the report. They came out in October, and we're hoping they don't condemn it. Right now, we've been using, the police department for training, but when whatever happens with that building happens, we could be left without a training facility. Alderman Bancroft kind of asked how come there's always money left, like a surplus at the end of the budget year. And one of the things I had related to the COVID pandemic is we didn't anticipate, I don't think anybody did, that it was going to be as serious as it was. and there was not money budgeted for all the special protective equipment, the personal protective equipment. So we had to basically take money from all sorts of different accounts. We were able to obtain a grant. We discovered the opportunity. Colleen took the lead in finance and getting all the paperwork. We got all that money back. It went to the general fund and it went to the reserve fund. Not one penny of that went back for any of the stuff that was deferred because that money was used for the PPE. So yes, we did have a positive balance at the end that increased the reserve, but it was at the expense of stuff that had to be deferred because of the emergency. Another item is our staffing. We've had for about the last year and a half, one of our positions held. It's still officially there, but it's been unfunded because of the COVID. Worried about revenue coming in. Well, revenue has been in excess of what was projected, and that position still hasn't been funded up to this point. So that's obviously having an impact in our operation as well. So those are just a couple of the items we've had. With equipment, we've had to defer replacement of some equipment, like a brush and utility vehicle, but also our ladder truck got pushed back 6 months. And we buy one every 12 years. We keep the other one for 12 more years afterwards. So now our reserve ladder truck that spends probably about 30% of the time in service is almost 25 years old, which is we take good care of it. We've got good fleet mechanics with our public works, but that's a ridiculously long time for an emergency vehicle. So those are just some of the things that, like Peter and the rest of us, I'll be around if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. I think what I want to do is focus on one project, which I think is kind of representative of like what you've been hearing from my colleagues as well too. I think in general, for IT, we've been deferring infrastructure projects for many years. The project I identified for you is certainly one of those projects where we're not following best practices as far as retiring, replacing things on a regular schedule. This has been our general practice. So we've been extending warranties. We've been getting the most of our systems. But I think in general, we've been doing a lot of deferring. And I think it's best to stay on regular replacement schedules. As you've heard from my colleagues on all of our other capital initiatives. And in general, as far as upcoming projects, I think one of the key ones for the upcoming year is we're going to be completely replacing our website and all of the technology that relates to our website, including the ability to start potentially streaming our meetings live in a different way than we're doing right now, interactive, with agenda management and a lot of other tools that are pretty typical tool sets that you'll see in a municipality. We've deferred those projects for a while. We have designed in the budget for this year, but implementation in upcoming years. So those are some of there's many technology projects. I think it was one of the most critical ones, I think, as far as impacts to the residents go. I'll answer questions at the end of our presentation.
Good evening. I just want to talk really about staffing. You know, the lion's share of most of our budgets, especially mine, is staffing. So in the last 2 years, we had a funding mechanism to increase our sworn staff, which is our sworn peace officers, from 58 to 60. So positions 59 and 60 were cut. Just by way of comparison, we were staffed at 57 officers in 2007. So it's been many years since we've got to this level. Our records department, as you know, TRICOM dispatches for us 24/7. But if you walk into the police station lobby, it's not staffed 24/7. With the new facility, the increase in activity, and just quite frankly, service levels, we had hoped to staff that around the clock. That didn't happen in this budget year. We did classify some of the positions moving forward. I know Jen and her team are doing a staffing analysis as far as compensation, but we brought the classification down a grade to save some money there, so that's about a $15,000 savings. Due to COVID, we didn't fill a number of positions, including a part-time restitution coordinator, a part-time records specialist, and a financial analyst. You know, one of the benefits that I have in the police department that maybe some other departments don't is I can use seizure funds and fine money to purchase things. So the last 2 years, each of our squad cars have been purchased with either fine money from traffic fines and arrests or narcotic seizures. That well is running dry. We also haven't we also haven't funded our equipment replacement fund for squad cars in the last 2 years. We cut our travel and training significantly. We had a 3% reduction in last year's fiscal budget amidst COVID, and then I had a $35,000 shave, if you will, at this year's budget that I included as a spreadsheet. The last thing I want to talk about real briefly is body cameras. This is an unfunded mandate from the state of Illinois that affects St. Charles in the year 2025. Initial estimates show that it's about $1,000 per year per officer. So it's 60 sworn officers. That's $60,000 a year as a lease. Or we've had some quotes for a 5-year purchase at about $400,000. We've written some grants. We've talked to all the local legislators. Matter of fact, today we attended a seminar at Elgin Community College, but that is something we have to plan for. I had hoped to fund that starting last year incrementally, and that was cut from this year's budget as well. So I'll be here towards the end of the budget presentation to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
A lot of information. I know that we just kind of condensed and gave to everybody, and I realize a lot of these things are sort of laying the groundwork for some of the discussions we will have in the summer about strategic planning, but I'm hoping that you can see from all of the creativity that the directors have been working with for a number of years. They've cut where they can, they've reduced where they can. There are some things that we're going to have to figure out how to plan and implement in the coming years, and I think that's for the betterment of the city of St. Charles as well. So keep in mind, half of that tax levy is going towards operations, the other half is going towards pension obligations. So the money that we're asking the residents to continue to contribute is to make sure that we're able to upgrade where we need to upgrade and provide the services that we're either mandated to provide or to continue making St. Charles a thriving city. So I'm asking for your support to extend that 4.99 tax levy percentage for the upcoming property tax levy year. But if there are any questions prior to that, staff is here to answer.
We'll start this end. Sure. Alderman Gala.
Well, that's a lot. Thanks, everyone, for putting this together. I did review everything over the weekend, and I am going to vote in favor of 499 just because I believe it's the right thing to do. And not only that, but I think we've been fiscally responsible. I've talked to others, and we did hold it level for a number of years, and it's time that we do increase it by that little bit. I just hope that all this new funding does go towards all these projects that we're discussing. And that's crucial that we use it for projects that we need to get done.
Yeah, I said my piece last time. It's time. So I want to thank Heather for your tutelage to getting all this together because it really, puts meat on that bone. Can I just ask a quick technical question? You talked about a portion of the mental health. Isn't that its own line item?
It is. So that
okay.
actually gets levied,
controlled.
but then we transfer it out. So.
Okay. Thank you.
So a couple of small questions. How many what's the staffing level for the city now compared to like 2008, 2009? Like how many employees do we have for city staff?
Total employees, Jen,
in the last 12
number
years, how many?
So if you're counting everybody, crossing guards, we cover around 300. We still know what it was.
Okay. I'm going to kind of put you on the spot. So raising the levy.
I'm happy to get that number for you, though. I mean, I'm sure we can.
Yeah, you're fine. Raising the levy without a new budget, what's the risk of that for 1 year?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the first part?
So if you don't, without a budget, because we're talking about a lot of the things that we want to do, we'd like to do, we need to do, we haven't been able to do. Moving forward with raising the levy to 4.99 without a budget, why is that advantageous, not advantageous? Why is this the move to do it now?
So they're offset. The way that we're required to pass the levy is always offset from when we pass the budget. So this allows us to incorporate the expected proceeds from that tax levy into our revenue stream for next year and be able to plan for that additional expenditure, basically. So otherwise, what we're doing again next year is we're in the same boat of, all right, what projects are we cutting because we have to pay certain things. We have to pay our insurance costs. All of those things are going up. So this means that now we have to continue cutting beyond where we already have. This list of projects that's contained within are almost guaranteed to then get deferred again for continuing years.
So, in your opinion, having been in this role for less than 6 months, knowing our history, and we're kind of in the same boat, in your opinion, would you have recommended raising the levy in years past? And if so, at what point would you have looked at our numbers and our history and said, that would have been the point that if I was city administrator, I would have come to council and said, you know what, now is time?
So I think when the recession hit in 2009, it was very strategic to maintain the tax levy at the flat dollar amount, so we were not losing funding on the percentage when all of the EAVs decreased. But I think as the EAVs started to go back up, looking at it as a broader picture, maybe not any single year, but as those started to tick up, that became the point at which we should have started to capture some of that additional increase, because now we're expanding services, all of the inflation is starting to kick back in, and we need to keep pace with that. So that's about the point that I would have looked at it. So we've got at least probably 5-6 years that they have remained flat, and we've worked within that tax levy without any additional funding sources.
Okay.
So I can't recollect having a discussion like this ever as part of our levy discussion. My memory can be faulty, but.
I remember discussing should we increase it or not.
But
past 8 years, I'm having a discussion.
Right, but I don't remember a presentation like this. No. So I think this is a sort of one of those seminal moments, right? Like, I think if we're going to do this together, this is the only way to do it. It's really to understand, when we do a levy and then there's a budget, and then the budget has to fit the revenue piece of it, there is no control. That's really to your point. And from my standpoint, this is sort of the first time when we're considering a levy that we had, hey, keep in mind, when we implement a budget, these are the decisions that we are making as staff in order to fit the box. And so I think working on this sort of dialogue is really going to be important going forward, because, it's an easy thing to forget about come the spring when you're thinking about budgets and then, and what staff has to do. And we're not asking people to do the impossible. So I'm in favor of it. I was in favor of it last week when we talked about it. I think that from our standpoint here, though, we really need to have this shouldn't be an event. This should be an ongoing dialogue. So you have a partner in the council helping on the budget side, as opposed to, just dealing with things on your own and in a vacuum, after a budget's approved. So I think it's a great discussion. I think it's a real step forward.
And if I can actually just in response to that, take a moment to thank all of the department directors for quickly putting all this information together, because when I looked at this document, I personally said this is going to be a great document for us to refer back to as a point in time that we've sort of looked at the status of projects, of things that needed to be done, things that haven't been done, and we can refer back to it to incorporate into strategic planning or other things that we know that we have to tackle. So I just think it's a good way for all of us as a new staff, as we're working together with some new council members as well, to get on the same page.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you. Last week, after taking a look at the proposal, I had more questions than I had answers. But I appreciate you kind of having the courage to come up and say this isn't going to work. And I also want to thank Colleen for her great work. I had an opportunity to meet with her, and just for the record, I have a background in accounting, worked in public accounting, and taking a look at our financials. When you take a look at the analysis over the last 9-10 years, we've increased our debt by out of the general fund by $1 million a year. It's unsustainable. We have over the last 6 years just about doubled our pension obligations. We have underfunded our vehicle replacements. we are hit by a ton of pressure. We have looked at, especially last year, looking at all of our departments operating at a budget level under what they were approved from. We have our most significant TIF. We have funded that at an interest-only level. When we were here last Monday, I said, okay, this is an interesting proposal. And after taking a look at the numbers, yeah, I am happy that the administration before was able to, find ways to advance us forward. But all of our trends are going in the wrong direction, and we have to. It's only fiscally responsible thing that we can do is do this now, which isn't severe, and with Heather's help and everybody else's help, take a look and make sure that our trends start to go in the other direction. And taking a look at all the challenges we have, there's also a lot of good things. In the next couple of years, we have, significant money coming back from very smart, strategic incentives that we've given out, bringing cost putters down. Those things are going to come back. There's some very positive things that are in the future right now. But one of the things that I heard is also, economic development, what's that going to have? Hope is not a plan. This is the only way to be fiscally responsible, and I appreciate all the work that the city's done to get us to here, because we're still in decent shape, but right now is exactly the time that we have to be responsible and make sure that we do this so we don't get into difficult situations, because we require this to operate at a good service level, not the world's best, not amazing, but a good service level, and allow some of the investments that we've made as a city to continue to bear fruit. But inflation is going up, sales tax is going up. There's a lot of good things are happening, but we can consider those things in the future if we do what's responsible today. So I'm very happy to support this, and I appreciate you bringing it forward in the way that you have. I think it's exactly the perfect time. I'm glad that we were able to run the city, at the levels that we were, but we can't going forward. So I support you, and I actually very, very much appreciate the way that you've done this, everybody.
Thank you.
Just very short and sweet. I gave my piece last week as well. I'm hearing everything that's being said here. Believe me, this is not falling on deaf ears. However, and Paul, thank you for your comments. Yeah, I agree with you. I would like to. I would like to. Next year's a different year. I would like to keep it at the EAV level for one more year and see what happens. It's not hope. It's like, as Alderman Warble mentioned, expectations of additional revenue generation, additional commerce are coming to the city. So let's see what happens. And it's just at this time I can't. Next year, it's a different year, but let's see how it goes.
I have a question about ARPA,
Sure.
The American Rescue Plan Act. Where are we at with that?
We've applied.
It was July we applied, right?
Yeah.
So they could go to Public Works for sewers and water mains? Is that what that?
Go to the enterprise fund.
Okay. So 2.2 million we received. We're expected to receive over 4 million, like $4,063,000. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
We received a number of payments similar to that. The most recent update, there's several communities that have not applied for the funds, and what they're going to do, they extended the application timeframe to the after November 1st, but we'll do the other. Our number is 7.
Okay. How come this wasn't brought up last week, that we had that money? Because I'm just curious, that's a big number, and I don't recall getting any sort of email or memo on that.
Well, one, it'll be part of the discussion, the budget discussions for next year, but two, it's always difficult to look at a grant funding mechanism as a way to correct some of the deficiencies that we've had long-term in our budget. And looking at it as a one-year snapshot isn't going to fix it. I'm looking at this as a wider snapshot of what are the projects that have been deferred, how many things do we need to do? Water and sewer, that's one fund. We're talking general fund here, operations, pension obligations, insurance, things like that, and those funds aren't really going to supplement what we actually need.
I'm kind of looking at it at the moment right now, where we're at right now. I'm not looking at it long-term, because I don't expect to get that every year, right? So for me, I'm going to hold off on a property tax levy increase. I think we're going to get additional funds, as Colleen had mentioned, and Also, what was passed just recently in DC, is there any expectation for us to get additional funding from that? Are we aware of anything with that? The Build Back America Fund that was just passed in DC, is there any, for infrastructure, is there any sort of information on that? It just passed like a few days ago.
Right, but the state already knows about the funding.
Okay.
I don't know that that's going to be pushed. And
Okay, but we should know more in the future, I anticipate.
Yeah, and certainly we'll have those discussions when we talk about capital planning projects and infrastructure upgrades, but I just want to make sure that we're still keeping the focus on the fact that we're talking general fund and operational items.
Right.
That's what we're needing to make some corrections to.
So the ARPA money we're going to discuss in February with the budget, is that what we're, okay, all right, okay, great, thank you.
Thank you. Heather, I have a question for you. I'm going to have a question, and I'll be quick. I think a question for Jen and two questions for Peter, and then a question about pension funding. But overall, you know, all the directors came up and presented their case, their stats for projects that were either reduced or eliminated from the budgets. I'm in favor of this. Let me just come out by saying that. But is that going to support fixing all those line items, half of those line items, the more important ones, et cetera?
What I would say is it's one step in a bigger plan. How I typically like to operate is as we come into this next planning budget year, we're going to take a hard look at all the budget line items, figure out where we can make cuts, where we can operate lean, so that we can focus more of those dollars on bigger plans. I want to stop doing so much bonding out and make sure that we move toward the pay-as-you-go method. I know that's sort of how the city was set up, as Larry Mahalan came in and started to operate as city administrator. That's much more of my model as well. I think that we lose something when we bond out for smaller projects. So as we start to create some additional revenue streams into the general fund, we can start earmarking some of those things for whether it's road improvement plans or diverting it to some of the other big projects that we need, so we can back off some of that debt model.
Okay. And then I think it was 2020 or 2021, it was in the presentation, the pension fund or the pension fund for police and fire was extremely low.
We're at 50.3 and 69.2 for police and fire respectively.
Was there any reason why it's low that particular year?
Oh, are you looking at a single snapshot year? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, currently, those are the numbers that we're sitting at. So what I will say is that this is not a unique obligation. A lot of cities are facing this, and a lot of it was when the crash happened in 2009. There was a lot of funding that was, you know, lost in investments, and we're the ones responsible for making that up as they've lost money on investments. So we are having to figure out a way to make that difference up.
But are these funds continuing to go up, like in a crazy percentage, or is there a trend where they go up certain years and come down?
I think it's based on retirements, and the way that the tiers are set up, there was not the same cap in place for some of the officers that have been, officers and firefighters that have been retiring. So the increase on their pensions every year continues to inflate as well. So there are some mechanisms in place to reduce for some of the newer employees, but it's going to take some years to actually see those translate.
So is it ever going to get worse before it gets better?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, that's good to know.
I mean, but as we start to have good investment years, I know we had some significant investment income last year. We have some of those good years to help offset some of those increased burdens, and that helps us to tackle it a little bit faster. We develop a plan to contribute some additional funding to it to start to tick down the liability a little bit. Then those are all the ways that we get rid of that quicker.
Okay, thank you. And then for Peter, I just had two questions. The first one, you had mentioned for roads. In a perfect world, if you spent $1.9 million or were able to fund $1.9 million, you'd have 30 or 40-year roads out there. What's happening now? I mean, are we doing mostly street surfacing repairs, or are there any roads that have been completely redone, but are they on a 10 or 20-year lifespan? I guess it's the question.
Yeah, I think we're doing it all, and I think you've witnessed that over the last decade. You know, we do some resurfacing, we do some reconstruction, we do patching. We try our best to go out and take care of the worst of the situation. But right now, the fact of the matter is we're on a 55-year replacement cycle. And it would be better to be on a 30-year, 25 to 30-year replacement cycle. That's how long roads last.
Right. And then in regards to the parking deck fund, I think you it stated you had $200,000, it was cut back to 115 or 113,000. What's involved in those funds? What are those funds used for in regards
So
to?
every year there's maintenance on our parking decks, and the biggest jump there that hasn't been funded was the addition of the clinkhammer deck. So for us, our parking deck line item has been pretty stable. Then a new clinkhammer deck came aboard. Public Works looked at it and said we had to spend X amount of dollars on that annually. We added that to our budget, but it was never approved. So it's just simply really taking care of additional parking needs.
And there's no parking decks right now that are completely in disrepair or?
No, but for example, the larger parking deck this year, we spent a significant amount of money on new louvers at the top of the deck. The fund for cameras that are currently there come out of this fund. The general maintenance, the caulking, striping, waterproofing on parking decks that we have over living spaces and office spaces is a continual maintenance item. That's the type of thing that this particular budget pays for.
Well, you hit the nail on the head regarding the roof and parking deck. I had a question for Jen. Thank you very much, Peter. I had a question for Jen. In regards to the compensation study, I think for 2021, that's not happening, I think it's stated. Is that correct?
Last year, the compensation study was deferred to this year. We're in the process of it right now.
Okay, you are going to do it. That's fine. It's probably above my pay grade to get in there, but I had a question in regards to comparable communities and compensation study. Are those both two separate things? Do they work together? Because I know we're at the 75th percentile now. So I guess I'm asking not why we need a compensation study. I know over time you probably always need to revisit that, but I guess why in regards to the comparable communities.
So the last time we did our compensation study, which was 4 years ago, we established our comparable communities. And those are the comparable communities we do to set our wages for our non-union, as well as what we use at the negotiating table when we're bargaining with the union. And those comparable communities are remaining in place. We can't go and change those, every few years, because you really can't create a solid system, especially when you're sitting at the table. So this compensation study this year is still utilizing those, collecting the data from those comparable communities, but it's focusing on internal equity to make sure that our like positions are properly graded together. So one of the reasons we do it every 3 years, it is a council direction to do it every 3 years. But also, it's just good practice, because the things that impact compensation are going to be some of the things we're talking about right now. It's going to be the status of the state of the economy. It's going to be legislation that's coming down with certain mandates. And it's going to be things that affect new positions we have to create, because there's new technology or new services that we create. So it's something that a good employer does every few years to check in and make sure our wages and our positions and our grades calibrated with what's out there in the market and what we need.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. So last week when I first spoke, I was in support of the levy. I'm still in support of the levy. Some of the things that back it up for me, obviously, with TIF districts underperforming, pension liabilities, debt obligations. I mean, these are all things that we're always going to have to deal with, right? And when I look at St. Charles right now, there's a lot of interest and development in St. Charles. It's because we have a good brand, right? I mean, people's houses have gone up in value. People want to come in here and build. Projects want to get, there's so many opportunities right now to come and build here in St. Charles because we're attractive. So I think it's really important for us to, maintain that brand integrity that we have here in town, which comes from services, which comes from, fire, police, response times, public services doing their job. I mean, residents, for the most part, when they have an issue, response time is really good for all services. And that's what, residents definitely, they see that and they expect that. And so, I mean, I think it's very important for us to support this, to continue to provide what the residents have come to expect, to maintain our high-level service and continue to, maintain that brand integrity, which is St. Charles. So I'm definitely in support of it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Peter Vitek, do you have any comments? Okay, thank you. So seeing no other comments or anything, can I have a motion in a second?
So moved.
Moved by Lencioni, seconded by Weber. Roll call, please.
Centrola?
No.
Wirball?
No.
Besser?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Bala?
Yes.
Hayleitner?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Bancroft?
Yes.
Lencioni?
Yes.
Motion passes, 7-2. So, okay, so now, if we move forward to next Monday's council meeting.
Correct, so the
Final
process will be,
approval.
correct, this will be for the vote on the preliminary estimate numbers next week, and then that will get properly noticed up and published, and then the official approval of the tax levy would continue in December, which we then file at the end of December with the county. So I just want to personally say thank you to all of the council members, and appreciate the feedback last week, and hopefully I was able to provide the information along with the department directors to give you the information you need to support this. Again, I want to thank Colleen, too. I know she did a lot of work on this, so thank you very much. And I know she sat down with a few of the aldermen that did have some questions on it. So I appreciate it. Assuming this does go forward next week and meets with formal city council approval, there are some talking points to support exactly the rationale for why staff is recommending this increase. Before you, I'm happy to email that out as well. And with that, I know that the mayor wanted to make a few additional comments. So, yes.
Before we do that, I don't see Colleen anymore, but I wanted to say thank you for the work that you did with me to help get into the weeds and get a great understanding of what's going on. So thank you, and it speaks to the great job that everybody here is doing, kind of pulling on the same end of the rope. So thank you, Colleen. Great work.
Hi, good evening. Just a couple things I wanted to say. This should not be taken lightly at all. I think I'm very proud of this council for making the decision that they did and the votes that were positive. I want to commend all of you for doing that. This is not an easy thing to do. It's definitely tough. For all those who voted yes, you are truly looking at the short-term, long-term strategic planning of everything that we are doing, and as evidenced by everything that the directors have put time in, and that many of you I know have talked to me, talked to Heather, talked to directors over the past couple of weeks. Thank you for putting the time in. I think it's very important, and it shows your support of our directors and our staff. And I want to, especially, I know it's already been said, but thank Colleen and Nick and Heather for all of the time you put into this. I'm just really proud of the decision that was made today, and I just want to thank you all. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay, any other business, comments, questions? Okay. Just have a motion and a second to adjourn?
Yep, we got one more.
I'm sorry, thank you. Yeah, I did this too. Thank you. Item B, recommendation to approve an ordinance terminating the designation of the Foundry Business Park redevelopment project area as created by the City of St. Charles as a tax increment financing redevelopment project area and dissolving the special tax given allocation fund for said redevelopment project area.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, the Foundry Business Park TIF District was created in 1997. In order to remedy the blighted areas around the Moline Foundry, there were numerous dilapidated buildings in the 40-acre area that was included in this TIF, including 3 buildings owned by the Moline Corporation, who had to file bankruptcy in 1990 and therefore left these large buildings vacated. This prompted this redevelopment idea. The good thing is this redevelopment replaced these dilapidated structures, replaced it with a business park that houses light manufacturing and commercial enterprises, as well as professional offices. In addition, the city took the opportunity to improve its infrastructure within that area by reconstructing roadways, by installing storm sewer lines and a storm sewer detention area, which help with the flooding in that area, as well as installed electric and water utilities. The city had issued $4.2 million in general obligation bonds to move this project forward. This funding, or these this debt was paid off in its entirety as scheduled. This happened to be one of the most lucrative TIFs that the city has. In fact, there are some funds remaining in this TIF, but Public Works is looking to help us out. They're looking to maybe do some street resurfacing and some other improvements that are part of the redevelopment plan. They'll be coming forward to you probably before the end of the year in order to commit the funds. The way this ordinance is written is that if we commit the funds, we can still spend it in the next year. So you can expect to maybe see some things from Public Works before year end. So the Boundary TIF has reached its 23rd year, and according to TIF statute, it must be terminated. So that's what I'm asking.
Questions or comments about this? Can I have a motion and a second, please?
So move.
Second by Wobble, second by Besner. Roll call, please.
Petrola?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Bala?
Yes.
Haylaitner?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Bancroft?
Yes.
Montioni?
Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, now, additional items. So, have a motion and a second. Moved by Lencioni, seconded by Bancroft. Roll call, please.
Petrola?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Bala?
Yes.
Haylaitner?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Bancroft?
Yes.
Montioni?
Yes.
Motion passes. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Just one. All of them.
Chief.